He wore the uniform. He carried the orders. And he stood beside a flag-draped casket, yet they told him he couldn't board. What happened next turned a silent active duty into a national firestorm. Colonel Marcus Bryant, 47, wasn't looking for attention. But when a military escort is denied his mission, and the internet watches it unfold live, a quiet injustice becomes a viral reckoning. This isn't just a story about one soldier, it's about how respect gets tested when no one thinks you'll push back. The hum of the airport was relentless. Children squealed as they chased rolling luggage. Gate announcements crackled overhead. Somewhere near the food court, a toddler was crying, his wail lost in the tide of footsteps and check-in beeps. Through that chaos stepped Colonel Marcus L. Bryant, 47 years old, tall, composed, with decades of service etched into the lines beneath his eyes. His uniform was immaculate, his medals polished. But the weight he carried that morning wasn't from brass or cloth. It was from the sealed casket that sat outside on the tarmac, shrouded in the American flag. Private First Class Daniel King was just 20, gone in a remote corner of the world few Americans could point to on a map. His parents were waiting back home in Colorado. They had no idea that even in death their son would encounter resistance returning to them. And Colonel Bryant had promised that no one gets left behind. He reached the ticket counter and calmly handed over his military documents and escort orders. The airline agent barely glanced up. She typed, frowned, looked again. Then came the hesitation. The pause that wasn't just about computer processing lag. A glance to her colleague. The stiffness in her posture. Her tone grew clipped. "Sir, there's an issue with your reservation. We can't allow you to board." Bryant didn't flinch. He had been through firefights, foreign diplomacy, and base closures. But this moment, this unexpected wall, was different. His orders were valid. His mission was sacred. Yet suddenly, he was being told no. Without reason. Without courtesy. Just policy. The agent avoided his eyes. Her words were rehearsed, robotic. In that moment, a deeper truth revealed itself, one far more unsettling than a misplaced reservation. Her discomfort wasn't rooted in logistics. It was rooted in something silent and unconscious. An internal calculation shaped by assumptions, fear, or unfamiliarity. Behind Bryant, a line began to form. Business travelers, tourists, a high school track team in matching sweatshirts. They shifted, whispered, stared. A few pulled out their phones. But Bryant stayed calm. That wasn't the part that shocked people. What shocked them was who he was and the solemn duty he was performing. And when that duty was denied, when that silence was met with indifference, the crowd's quiet transformed into outrage. Not just at the policy, but at what it said about the country they thought they knew. Colonel Marcus Bryant remained rooted in place. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back. His presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. He was a man on duty, standing beside a promissoire not for himself, but for the young man wrapped in the stars and stripes just outside the gate. The line behind him grew. So did the silence. People noticed, not just the uniform, but the way the airline staff avoided eye contact, the way the agent stiffened with each question. The longer it dragged, the more the energy in the terminal began to change. A man 3 spots behind Bryant leaned to his wife, whispering, "Is he being stopped?" A teenager in a USC hoodie frowned and pulled out his phone. 2 rows over, a woman in her 60s, wearing a veteran pin on her denim jacket, squinted toward the counter and muttered, "That doesn't look right." Tension doesn't always explode. Sometimes it simmers boiling beneath routine. This was one of those moments. The usual airport chaos slowed, then sharpened. And then it happened. "Excuse me," said a voice. Calm, older, a step forward. It came from a man wearing a cap with faded insignia USMC. Retired Sergeant Nathaniel Green, 66, had seen the world in uniform. His back wasn't as straight as it used to be. But when he stepped forward, you felt it. He pointed at the counter. "This man's wearing a dress uniform. You can't be serious." The agent hesitated. "Sir, I assure you, this is just a—" "No," Green cut in. His voice, not loud, but firm. "Don't assure me. I've done escort detail. I know what it looks like. This man's doing a job none of us want. And you're telling me he's not cleared to fly? Another pause. Then a quiet murmur spread through the line. Phones were out, now not just pointed, but live. A young woman with glasses and a power bank tucked into her coat opened Instagram Live and titled her stream, "This is not okay. Number let him fly." Colonel Bryant said nothing. His silence said enough. He wasn't confused. He wasn't begging. He was waiting for truth, for respect, for the system to decide who it really wanted to be in that moment. And that's what unsettled people most. The power of silence, of restraint. Within minutes, the story began to circulate. Twitter feeds lit up. Army colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. This is how we treat our own? Read one post, already gathering thousands of shares. The crowd inside the terminal was no longer passive. They were participants, now leaning in, asking questions, recording. One woman waved over a supervisor, her voice sharp. "Why is he being held up?" The supervisor arrived, mid-50s, pressed shirt, clipped name tag. He looked tired, defensive. "Ma'am, we're simply following standard security protocols." Green stepped in again. "Which protocol denies an active military escort access to his flight?" No answer. The woman from earlier lifted her phone. "Then say it on camera." The supervisor backed off. "I'm going to check on something. Please wait here." And he vanished behind the frosted glass door near the back office. But the situation had already escaped the airline's hands. Passengers weren't just recording, they were narrating. A teenage boy on TikTok reenacted the moment Bryant was denied. A middle-aged teacher wrote a Facebook post titled, "He's not just a soldier, he's a symbol." The emotional arc resonated for one reason. It clashed with what Americans believed was non-negotiable honor, especially toward those who serve. Even more, the crowd knew this wasn't just a clerical mistake. The language of policy had worn thin. And while no one could say for sure what motivated the staff's decision, the delay spoke to something unspoken yet familiar, an institutional reflex to say no first, then figure it out later. And when the subject wore a black face, it didn't feel like coincidence. Some quietly acknowledged it. Others said it aloud. "He wouldn't be stopped if he looked like me," one man whispered to his wife. The recording continued. Hashtags grew. Number escort respect trended next to number let him fly. Within the hour, a major advocacy group reposted the footage on X, stating, "Every fallen soldier deserves dignity. Every escort deserves respect. This must be addressed." Newsroom alerts picked it up. Regional blogs, then larger outlets. Every new post added momentum, and every moment the airline failed to act, the story spread wider. But the incident wasn't just gaining speed, it was becoming a mirror. It reflected a nation's unresolved contradictions, pride in military service, but neglect in honoring those who fulfill it, calls for equity, but routine experiences of inequity, endless praise for sacrifice, but no systems to ensure that sacrifice is met with dignity. The moment could have passed quietly, a denial, an apology, a rescheduled flight. But too many people had seen. Too many had already clicked share. And Colonel Bryant, still calm, still waiting, knew something few others did. He had been trained to complete missions under fire. He understood pressure. But this mission? This required something deeper. Patience with injustice, poise in humiliation, and clarity when the world refused to give either. He didn't need to raise his voice, because now the country was raising it for him. The supervisor didn't return. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Colonel Marcus Bryant remained unmoved, a sentinel amid growing unrest. He stood not with defiance, but with dignity, his silence, the loudest voice in the terminal. And still, the line grew. Bystanders had moved past curiosity. Now they were witnesses. Then, allies. What began as disbelief was turning into indignation, the kind that spreads like wildfire when fueled by injustice, patriotism, and a live internet connection. A young man in a gray bomber jacket paced nearby, holding his phone toward the crowd. "Yo, this is live. Colonel Bryant, U.S. Army. They're denying him a seat while he's escorting a soldier home. That's what we're doing now? Across the terminal, more phones came out. Some were recording, others were tweeting. A mother with her toddler on her hip asked aloud, "How does this even happen?" The emotional weight intensified with every new viewer. Online, hashtag surged. Number let him fly. Number dignity for the fallen. Number justice for Bryant. Each post added fuel. The colonel wasn't just a man anymore. He was a symbol of duty denied, of values violated, and of a system stumbling in real time. As the story grew, it hit a nerve deeper than policy failure. It revealed a discomfort Americans knew too well, that even honor could be overlooked when prejudice wore a polite face. The frontline employees weren't shouting, they weren't throwing slurs, but the damage was done all the same. The decision not to act, the decision to stall, the instinct to hide behind undefined rules. Inside the airline's back office, there was no protocol for this kind of firestorm. No checkbox for viral failure. The old playbook delay, deflect, disappear was already falling apart. And then from the crowd, a voice rang out. This man deserves more than silence. It was that same Marine veteran Greenahis voice, steady, his gaze locked on the counter. And though he didn't raise his volume, the room quieted again. A moral center had emerged. Not with authority, but credibility. One soldier recognizing another. A ripple of agreement moved through the terminal. The woman live streaming nodded toward him. The young man in the bomber jacket repeated the line in his video. This man deserves more than silence. That became a refrain. Online, on signs, on captions. Outside the terminal, the media was catching up. A veteran advocacy group posted, "Airline fails to honor fallen soldiers' escort. We are demanding accountability." By the hour, national news outlets picked up the story. Blogs ran headlines. Colonel denied duty, the moment that sparked a nation's outrage. And within 24 hours, a local journalist published still images. Bryant standing tall, surrounded by a swelling crowd of concerned citizens. He looked calm, stoic, like he belonged in Arlington, not being interrogated by airline staff. The image went viral. By the time the airline's public relations team drafted a response, it was already too late. Comment sections were filled with veterans, Gold Star families, and civilians who felt a line had been crossed. Not just a line of respect, but of truth. The kind of truth Americans want to believe. That service is honored, not debated. That duty earns dignity, not scrutiny. But here was proof that even the sacred could be sidelined. And the public wasn't having it. Stock tickers noticed. Within hours, the airline's value dipped. A trending boycott gained steam. Shareholders raised questions. The company's silence became a risk factor. And the more they tried to manage it, the more unmanageable it became. Yet behind the outrage lay a deeper reckoning. The real question wasn't, how could this happen? The question was, why does this still happen? People online shared personal stories, being mistaken for less than they were, being doubted in uniform, being ignored while doing the right thing. The cultural contradiction had been exposed. America reveres its military, but doesn't always recognize its soldiers when it matters most. And when race intersects with duty, even the most basic expectations can be denied. Social media made that truth unignorable. And this time, the evidence was undeniable. Live streams, photos, witness accounts. The facts weren't buried, they were trending. So, when the airline issued a press statement, calling it a regrettable misunderstanding, it only made things worse. The public didn't want regret. They wanted change. In the comments, one user posted, "If she hadn't live streamed, would this have been swept away?" Another replied, "If he hadn't worn the uniform, would they have believed him?" It wasn't just about Bryant anymore. It was about every quiet denial that never made headlines. Every moment when policy replaced empathy. Every time someone was made to feel invisible. The outrage was real, but so was the exhaustion behind it. Still, through it all, Colonel Bryant stood tall. No interviews, no statements, just duty. Until a second figure appeared. Not from the airline, Military dress, confident stride. A man in his 50s, with a clipped ID badge reading, Major Peter Holloway, September of the Army. He approached Bryant with a quiet nod. "Colonel, your orders have been reviewed. You'll no longer be flying commercial." The room hushed. The major continued, his voice low but firm. "Private military transport is en route. Your mission continues, uninterrupted." Bryant offered a firm nod. "Understood." No applause followed. No cheers. Only silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't avoidance. It was respect. A signal that, at least for now, justice had caught up. And for the airline whose leadership scrambled to recover, the damage wasn't just reputational. It was cultural. They had ignored a man whose job was to not be ignored. And the world had seen it happen. The air inside Terminal C felt different now. Not just tense but charged. The kind of energy that builds just before something shifts. Phones were still raised. Screens were still live. But even the passengers had stopped narrating. They were waiting. Watching. And then the glass doors near the back of the airline office slid open again. Only this time, it wasn't the supervisor. Two men emerged. One wore a tailored Navy suit with an airline pin on his lapel. His expression was tight, rehearsed. The other walked beside him, taller, older, and unmistakably military. His jacket bore no airline logo. His stance was practiced. His eyes scanned the terminal like someone used to command. The second man stepped forward and stopped just feet from Colonel Marcus Bryant. He extended his hand. "Colonel Bryant, I'm Major Peter Holloway, Department of the Army. I was dispatched as soon as the incident was confirmed." Bryant took the handshake firmly, but his face remained unreadable. Major Holloway nodded, then turned to the crowd, his voice steady. "Effective immediately, Colonel Bryant and the remains of Private First Class. Daniel King will no longer be flying commercial. A military aircraft is on standby. The transfer is underway." A gasp moved through the terminal. The airline manager in the suit stepped forward, trying to speak, but Holloway cut him off. "Your team will not interfere further." The man hesitated. "Sir, we've issued an apology. We're willing to—" "You're willing to salvage optics," Holloway said calmly, but his tone left no room for debate. "Let's be clear. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a breakdown in awareness, accountability, and respect." The words weren't shouted, but they hit hard. And not just for the airline. For every witness watching online and in person, it was a moment of reckoning. The crowd remained silent. Holloway turned back to Bryant. "Your mission continues, as it should have from the start." Bryant nodded once. "Understood." They didn't shake hands again. They didn't need to. Because in that moment, the weight of what had happened settled over the entire room. This wasn't just a logistical failure. It was symbolic. It revealed something deeper about how institutions respond to visibility. If the cameras hadn't been rolling, would this intervention have arrived? If no one had posted, would there have been a private plane, a major, a public statement? That question lingered in the background, unspoken but present. Even now, the airline's leadership was scrambling behind closed doors. The damage was done, and they knew it. But it wasn't just about public opinion. There were regulations, oversight, veteran affairs committees, military protocols. What the airline had disrupted wasn't just a passenger's itinerary, it was a sacred responsibility, one that carried layers of emotional and procedural weight far beyond a boarding pass. And the fact that it took national attention to correct it only sharpened the sting. Out on the tarmac, a black SUV waited near the service gate. The casket, draped in its flag, had already been moved with care, not by the airline, by the military personnel who had arrived minutes earlier. Quiet, precise, professional. Inside the terminal, people started to lower their phones. But the story wasn't fading, not yet. Because even as justice was restored, the memory of how it had nearly been denied remained fresh. A woman near the window, still holding her phone, whispered, "He didn't raise his voice once." The Marine veteran nodded. He didn't have to. Major Holloway faced the crowd one last time. "For those of you who stood up, for those who recorded, asked questions, refused to look away, thank you. This should never have happened." But because it did, and because it was seen, it will be addressed. That's a promise. He turned and walked toward the exit. Bryant followed. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. Because behind them, the story was already rewriting itself. Not with spin or slogans, but with truth. And for once, truth wasn't just a casualty of procedure. It was the turning point. The plane carrying Colonel Marcus Bryant and Private First Class Daniel King had already lifted off when the fallout began to take shape. It started with a single headline. Army Colonel denied flight while escorting fallen soldier. Public outrage mounts. By the time the video reached national networks, the moment wasn't just news, it had become a movement. Screens across the country replayed the image. A silent colonel standing alone at a ticket counter. His duty delayed, his dignity tested. In the background, witnesses raised them. And across the country, people raised their voices. Social media continued to churn, not just with anger, but with action. A national hashtag campaign numbered Dignity in Uniform rose, alongside coordinated calls for reform. Veterans organizations released joint statements. Major news anchors led their evening reports with the story. Influencers and public figures spoke out, posting videos demanding change. For the airline, silence was no longer an option. Their first statement, made a short paragraph citing an unfortunate internal miscommunication, was met with ridicule. Within hours, their second statement arrived. This time, it included an apology from the CEO, who appeared on camera, somber and scripted. "We failed to meet the standards of honor and respect owed to every service member," he said. "We are reviewing our procedures and taking immediate steps to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." But the public had seen too much to accept generic reassurances. Comment sections flooded with stories of everyday disrespect. Soldiers returning home in uniform denied early boarding. Gold Star families asked to prove their credentials. One woman wrote, "It's not just about this one man. It's about the hundreds who aren't filmed." That truth landed hardest. Colonel Bryant's ordeal had struck a national nerve, not because it was unique, but because it was familiar. The airline's reputation crumbled faster than their stock price. Within 2 days, it dropped nearly 9%. Investors called emergency meetings. Partner airlines issued their own statements to distance themselves. Advocacy groups filed formal complaints with the Department of Transportation and several congressional offices. A petition demanding mandatory training for airline employees on military protocol surpassed 300,000 signatures in under 48 hours. Meanwhile, lawsuits loom. A coalition of military rights attorneys announced their intent to file a discrimination suit not only on behalf of Bryant, but on behalf of all uniformed escorts forced to navigate inconsistent or disrespectful airline practices. And in the middle of it all, Colonel Bryant said nothing. He didn't appear on morning shows. He gave no interviews. He didn't tweet. Instead, he stood with the family of Private First Class King, helping carry the flag-draped casket through a quiet cemetery in Colorado. The boy's mother held his hand. She didn't thank him for the headlines. She thanked him for keeping his promise. And that moment, small, private, unseen, became the answer to the country's biggest question. What does respect actually look like? It doesn't look like trending hashtags or damage control. It looks like showing up. It looks like quiet commitment. It looks like refusing to let a soldier's journey end in a waiting line. But the story didn't end at the gravesite. It lingered in congressional hearings, where representatives grilled transportation officials on how something like this could happen. It showed up in shareholder meetings, where stakeholders demanded answers about the brand's collapse in public trust. And it echoed in classrooms, community centers, and living rooms across the country, where people asked, what if no one had filmed it? Because that's the part that wouldn't go away. If not for the Marine who spoke up, if not for the woman who live-streamed, if not for the witnesses who refused to look away, would anything have changed? That question, more than any statement, became the final verdict. A story that began with silence, ended with accountability. And though Colonel Bryant had long since moved on, his stillness at that counter became a symbol, a moment when one man's dignity stood taller than an entire institution's failure. Colonel Marcus Bryant never sought the spotlight. He wasn't campaigning, protesting, or raising his voice. He showed up to do his duty, an escort mission as sacred as any combat assignment. And yet, by standing still, he moved an entire nation. What happened at that airport was never just about a policy failure. It was about a pattern where institutions lean on procedure over principle, where respect becomes conditional, where someone in uniform, even on the most solemn mission, can still be questioned, edited, dismissed, or denied. That's why the story resonated, because it exposed the gap between what Americans say they honor and how that honor plays out in real life. The backlash wasn't manufactured. It was earned. People weren't outraged by an isolated mistake. They were reacting to something they recognized, a truth that too many have lived through in silence. And for once, it was caught in the open, unfiltered, undeniable. But the real power of that moment wasn't in the outrage. It was in the unity. Strangers stood up. Veterans spoke out. Passengers recorded, questioned, and refused to look away. A single live stream turned confusion into clarity. And the pressure they created forced institutions to listen not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. That's collective power. It doesn't come from hashtags alone. It comes from the decision not to be quiet. From ordinary people recognizing that silence makes systems comfortable. Colonel Bryant completed his mission. Private First Class Daniel King made it home. But this wasn't a story of one man and one flight. It was a warning, a reminder, a call. Because respect should never depend on whether a camera is watching. It shouldn't require public humiliation or viral proof. It should be the standard for every soldier, for every mission, for every person. And when it isn't, let the silence be broken. Not just for justice, not just for respect, but because next time it might not go viral. And still, it will matter just as much.